Sure. Okay, I know that some of you are still coming in, but we're gonna get started. Hello, I'm Joshua Zinder. I was AIA New Jersey's 2021 president, and I'm currently on the National Small Firm Exchange Executive Board. Sloan Springer is our current AIA New Jersey chair of the Small Firm Exchange, which is often shortened to AIA and SFX. Ruchi Dar, who is here as well, is our SFX New Jersey state rep. We'd also like to thank Lisa Walzer for all her hard work as SFX New Jersey chair for the last 2 years. Our mission is to become a resource for small firms. If you'd like to join our committee to help plan future events and enjoy some interesting discussions, or just join our monthly meetings with great speakers like tonight, or just open discussion forums to help small firms, and/or you're interested in joining our Slack channel, open to all AIA New Jersey small firm practitioners, for sharing knowledge and resources, please contact Christina Goldstein, our meetings and events manager. Her contact information will be in the chat, along with information on joining our Slack channel. During the presentation, attendees will not be able to be seen or heard by the presenters, but may pose questions using the Q&A feature, which is typically found at the bottom of the screen. There will be a poll during the presentation in Slido. Please answer the polls there, but do not post your presentation questions there. After the presentation, Ruchi and Sloan will pose these questions to the speakers. In 2023, I was lucky to see Will Teass present Teass and Warren's work, and I was inspired and even more impressed when I discovered that their work is produced by a small firm. Will's input on the Small Firm Exchange National Board has been inspiring. It is my pleasure to introduce Will Teass and Charles Warren this evening. Will Teass, AIA Lead AP, is co-founder and managing principal of Teass and Warren Architects, a Washington, D.C.-based architectural interiors firm focused on urban infill projects. Will holds a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from University of Virginia, a Master's of Architecture from Princeton, and is licensed to practice architecture in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. His exceptional projects include the collection at R Street, NetZero RowHouse, Mercury Public Affairs at Boilermaker, Heiner Contemporary, and numerous other works in and around D.C. Many of these exemplary designs have been featured in the New York Times, Home and Design, Architecture DC, and the Washington Business Journal. Speaking engagements include AIA National Conference on Design, Design DC, NeoCon, NeoCon East, DC Preservation League events, and Capitol Hill Restoration Society Preservation Cafe sessions. He has served on the board of directors of AIA DC since 2018 and currently serves as the 2025 President Emeritus. He also co-founded AIA DC Small Firm Exchange in 2021 and currently serves on the National SFX Board. He was an active member of the Washington ULI Next program and co-led flights in past years. Outside of the profession, he is a member of the Grounds Committee of the Historic Congressional Cemetery and received the Sousa Distinguished Service Award. Charles Warren, AIA Lead AP, co-founder and principal of design at Teass Warren Architects, brings over 20 years of exceptional design experience to the firm. He received a Bachelor of Architecture from Virginia Tech and is licensed to practice architecture in District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. In his role as principal of design, Charles is primarily focused on elevating the quality of every project. He can often be heard speaking at various organizations and universities where he enjoys mentoring and inspiring young designers. Award-winning work includes the collection at R Street and Le Parc. His background encompasses projects of varying sizes and typologies, including master planning, mixed-use, multifamily, single-family custom homes, and commercial interiors. This unique perspective allows for creative architectural solutions for projects of all scales and complexities. With an emphasis on improving the urban environment through infill projects in the Washington, D.C. region, Charles is deep understanding of local regulations greatly informs his design process. He is particularly focused on creating affordable and attainable housing imbued with high quality design and timeless detailing. He currently serves as a co-chair of the DC BIA Housing Committee, where he organizes events for architects, developers, general contractors. In addition, he is an active member of AIA DC CRAN Committee and previously participated in the AIA DC Design Excellence Committee. Gentlemen, welcome. Take it away.
Thank you so much. So let me get the sharing going here. Is that coming across for everyone?
Yeah.
Take it as a yes. Excellent. Great. Well, good evening. As I was introduced, my name is Will Teass, and it's really our pleasure to be here tonight. Charles and I speak often together, and I think it actually, one, it's a little bit less work, but two, I think it actually adds a little bit to the conversation to have both of us. And so tonight we wanted to talk about some of our recent work and put that in the context of missing middle housing, which is, at this point starting to get to be an overused term, but it really is very fundamental to what we do and specifically how we do it in urban environments in and around DC. The title itself comes from a 1970 film, Five Easy Pieces, which is just a happy coincidence. There's no ulterior motives here, but that film, for those of you who haven't seen it, is a classic road drama featuring Jack Nicholson and a piano. So with that being said, we will move forward in the presentation. There we go. So learning objectives. So some of you may be here to get HSW credits, and so we don't want to disappoint. I don't want to necessarily read this to you, but we really want to talk about our approach to designing missing middle spaces in and around the DC area and where it makes sense to apply strategies like NetZero and passive house. All of our projects have constraints, and we actually talk about constraints a lot in the office as really opportunities, and understanding how those constraints can actually shape and make the spaces and buildings that we design better. I think there are many approaches to how you might take on multifamily housing, and looking at those different typologies and how to evaluate each one of those. And then finally, starting to develop a toolkit of different housing types to bring what we call gentle density into urban neighborhoods. So hopefully you all can see this. There's a QR code on the screen. Slido is an interactive program. As Josh mentioned, there is a poll feature. So if you can click on that now and start the process, that would be great. As Josh also mentioned, there's a Q&A feature. And so what we're really doing, we'd like for you to not to use the Slido Q&A. We'll use the Zoom Q&A for that, but you'll see some poll questions. So while you're getting that squared away, we will talk about our office. So we are a boutique firm in DC that focuses on infill development opportunities for homeowners, for business owners, for developers, for institutional clients. Over the years, we've varied between 8 and 12 people, and really the office came out of a desire that Charles and I had to be involved with the work. We really enjoy what we do, and we really want to be part of it. And so these are just some of the more candid shots of some of the things that we do together as a group. We've been working with a professor at Maryland for a number of years on sketch sessions. We try to get out on construction sites. Everyone gets a green hard hat when they sign up. We also go out and participate in the community and pick up trash. The Anacostia never seems to not fill up with plastic bottles. And then we also, several times each month, we do an office pinup where we pin up current work in the space. And it's a great opportunity for our younger staff to get some public speaking experience, and gives an opportunity for everyone to see all the work that we do. So this is our first poll, and this is really just are you listening? So this should pop up in your Slido. And it's a very simple question about your age. And so if you can take a minute or two to fill that out. Someone was a little bit worried when we got on. It's anonymous, so it's don't be bashful. Try to tell the truth. So
your secret is safe with us.
Yeah. So it looks like we, in addition to missing middle, we have some middle-aged people here today too, Charles. So.
Including me.
Both of us. Well, great. Thank you for sharing. So at this point, I think everyone here is familiar with missing middle. And for us, we went to a lecture back, oh gosh, I don't know, 2019, 2020 maybe, or maybe earlier, but it was at the National Building Museum, and it really was just inspirational, not in the sense that it changed the work that we were doing, but it really put a name to the work that we were doing. And this is the classic diagram produced by Opticos. If folks don't have the Missing Middle Housing book, I highly encourage you to pick it up. It's a great sort of series of case studies. But for it brackets, it's housing typologies between that single family and the mid-rise or high-rise. And so there's all these really cool housing types. Some of them are not as, or were not as prevalent. I think that's changing, but whether it's a duplex or a triplex or townhomes or multiplex, all those kinds of things are really important. And that's really a lot of the work that we do. And so it was great to kind of come across this almost randomly and realize, oh, there's actually a name for what we do. So this is another poll question. So for those of you, this is a personal preference, and again, this is anonymous, but be curious within this audience if you can rank the top 3 choices of where you personally would like to live. Is it a single family detached home? Is it a duplex? Is it a single family attached or semi-attached, like a row house or a brownstone? Is it a triplex? Is it a large apartment building? Often they have amenities that are actually pretty nice, pools and whatnot. Triplexes, just so getting a sense of where folks would like to be. So we'll give that poll another minute or two. So I think it seems like most people prefer that either that semi-family detached or semi-family attached. Cool. And I think if anyone's interested, I think that we've done this before where we've exported the data, and we're happy to kind of share that. Yeah. It's kind of an interesting way to look at it. All right. So we included this at the risk of delving into politics. So, politics is I guess politics was our factory, which is in the process of being shut down, it seems like. But I think there's been an increasing discussion, and I think it's really, really interesting because it just really resonated with us. And it's this idea that there's a lot of levels of regulation. There's a lot of elements that kind of have combined to create almost a real obstacle. And I don't know what the answer is. And so I'm interested in kind of talking about this with folks tonight. But this is an article just very recently, within the last couple of weeks, in I think it's the March 10th edition of the New Yorker. That's really a book review. And I think it speaks to a book that Ezra Klein and his colleague at the Atlantic are writing about called Abundance. But it's this idea that we have, from the sort of 60s and 70s, there's all these sort of laws that have accumulated. And really the challenge that we're all facing, particularly in small firms, and why I think it's so relevant is that, it causes things to take a long time. It makes things hard. And so this notion that I highlighted here that, each individual decision is rational. We're not opposed to historic preservation. We're not opposed to environmental regulations, but the collective consequences are maddening, where it takes months and years to get permits. And it seems like it's an uphill battle for every project. And so I don't know what the future holds. So it's kind of interesting for those of you who are maybe interested in this topic. I would encourage you to take a look at this article, or there was a similar piece in the New York Times recently as well. But I think that's the challenge that we're going to be facing moving forward, is how do we kind of, this notion of how do we learn how to build again? And I don't think it's a Democratic Republican or anything, it's just as a society, we need to figure out a better way forward, because I think that the current way is proving to be somewhat problematic. That's the end of the political part. So let's talk about the projects that we wanted to share with you tonight. So there are, this is a map of DC highlighting the 4 of the 5 projects. We're cheating a little bit because we wanted to talk about something we think is really interesting. So the first project is called NetZero RowHouse. It is a duplex. There are 2 units on a single lot. It's in it's right outside of the historic part of Capitol Hill, but it's part of the city. It's a smaller scale development. The second project is actually across the river in Arlington. And so that project is a true duplex, so it's detached on all sides. The third project is, we call it a high rise for us, but it's really a mid rise or low rise building for the rest of the world. But it's an interesting project that we were able to design and get built in a historic district. Collection at our street, some of you may have attended our talk at the conference last year where we focused just on that project, but that's a really interesting project that has a number of different types of missing middle housing on it. And so how we approach that along with a really compelling adaptive reuse. And then finally, the project we call Greenhouse, which was a competition entry for the Point Axis block out in Denver, Colorado. And we included that because it really represents the next step, I think, in our practice. Charles very recently chair or moderated a panel, I should say, with our chief building official, a major developer, and a co-consultant on sort of what the challenges that point axis blocks have in DC. And so we really, and I know that these are happening in other jurisdictions in the country. So we'll come back to that as we get into that project. So just not to delve too much into the zoning, both Charles and I are self-proclaimed zoning nerds, but DC has a tremendous amount of residential land. And so almost 60% of the city is zoned for some kind of single family project. So that can be detached in the lighter yellow, attached in the darker tones of orange. But so there's a tremendous opportunity here to sort of introduce the concept of gentle density. And so we see that throughout the city. The rest of the city is made up of mixed use and row house districts, which is a lot of the work that we already do in. But I think it just, and it'd be curious to kind of look at, I think, understanding the not just the zoning on your particular project site, but just conceptually where your local jurisdictions, where those opportunities are, where the changes are coming. I think we're about to embark on a comprehensive plan update, which is going to shift some of these boundaries. So the next question is more of a word cloud. So we're really curious where our audience is tonight. So I think the prompt should allow you to put in a zip code. And so we were just really curious to see where people were coming in, and I'll just pontificate for a moment on small firm exchange, because I think that's really the incredible part about small firm exchange. And it's really combined with the technological advances that came out of COVID of having a Zoom interface, which made video conferencing available for all. And it really makes events like this really possible. And I hope that we're able to continue that trajectory and hope that other small firm chapters can engage with one another. And I know here in DC, we're inviting folks from other chapters to come in for a Pecha Kucha style presentation at one of our meetings. And I think there's really an opportunity for collaboration at a larger level in this kind of forum. So really cool to see these things. So thank you so much for sharing. And again,
this is awesome.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So Charles and I are going to tag team this a little bit. I'm going to start off talking about a project we call NetZero RowHouse, and that's the small scale. So these all 5 of these images are all the same scale and represent that range of projects that we do here, and really represents the projects that we really enjoy doing. So starting off with NetZero RowHouse, this was a project that is an expansion and really a reconstruction of an existing row house. So the lower right-hand corner in black and white is what it was when we started, and then on the left, obviously, is where we ended up. And this is a pretty classic design problem for us in DC, where you're taking an existing house, in this case, it was built in 1925, and we are expanding it to meet the needs of a modern family. And so to do that, we wanted to create space above. So we have what's called a pop-up. We have space below in the form of an accessory apartment or separate dwelling unit, and then we also did a rear addition. But I think one of the things that's important to note here is that we were very interested in maintaining the relationship of the existing fabric to the street. And so keeping the porch was key, keeping the dimensions of the front yard was important, keeping the existing window masonry openings, and really preserving that because it has such a key relationship. And then what you're seeing above is some sense of that third floor addition. And so that was set back both because we needed to for zoning, but also because it gave us an opportunity, as we'll see later, for some more outdoor space. But I think one of the things that we try to do as designers is really think about the not just building that we're working on, but also the streetscape and the adjacent construction. And I think that's part of, those are some of the clues or constraints that are really, really important to consider when we're thinking about design. So the site plan here really illustrates, you can see below the houses in green, there's a pattern of about 9 row homes that were all built at the same time. One of the cool things when you do work in DC and you do work in row houses, when you take off the plaster off the walls, you can often see the construction openings that are in the party walls because that was the most efficient way to transport material from one to another. So it's always interesting to me to think about DC because all these row houses were all built at different times. And so this house and the house below were all built in 1925, and the house above this was built in 1886, 1887. And so it blows my mind to think about our row house districts as being really, there was a period in time where they were not continuous, where there were these large tracts of open land in between. But so, in order to take a house that was about 1,500 square feet and expand it, we needed to go back, and you can see that rear addition here. We also have a public alleyway at the back. We're blessed to be in a city that has a really robust alley system, which helps with a lot of these projects. And so we were able to create off-street parking, and then we have an entrance, which is keynote 6, down to the lower level. So this is a diagram of one of the types of projects that we do. So what's in green is what we kept, right? So we kept the front facade, we kept the roof line, we kept the party walls, obviously, because they support both our construction, but also our neighbors. But then we talked about adding things. So what you're seeing in yellow are the rear walls that were added. And then this project, we went a little bit above and beyond, and that was related, I think, to the desire from an interior space perspective of having minimizing bulkheads, but also allowing us to run these systems as part of a net zero project. And so we replaced the floors, and then we went down into the ground, which is where we have that accessory dwelling, and then we also did a 3rd floor addition. So there was a point at which you opened the front door and you saw, and you looked down and a story down into a pile of dirt and looked up into the sky, and it was happy to get past that. So it was fun for a little bit. So this is the house today. On the lower right hand corner, you can see the existing kitchen layout, and then this is the revised kitchen layout. And so the original house really had 3 rooms on the ground floor: a living room, a dining room, and a small kitchen. And this is really more of a response to the sort of changing priorities of residential space planning, that we made the kitchen and the dining area one large space, and we wanted to, where, quite frankly, most of the time is spent. One of the other more subtle things here was we played with the section a little bit, and so you step down from the living room passageway into the kitchen. Again, it goes back to this idea about keeping a relationship to the streets, keeping the floor lines of the existing floors, even though we replaced them, maintaining the relationship of the floor to the window and then the windows to the ceiling. But we wanted to get a little bit more ceiling height, so we ended up pushing down a little bit further into the ground at the back here, which corresponded to the bedroom below. Creating outdoor space in urban environments is something that we also are very focused on. And so in this case, we created a space at the rear with a pergola. It's an opportunity to connect the inside to the outside. We can do this kind of thing in our climate zone probably for about 6 weeks out of the year before the mosquitoes rush in. And so everyone's first question is always like, well, what do you do about mosquitoes? And the short answer is there's a roller screen that can close off the 2 areas. But I think the benefit for the project was to really create a wall of glass that was relatively economical, in the sense that we could do something that was off the shelf, but then there were points in time where we can transform and create this outdoor space in connection to the outside. So this is a section that highlights some of both the section of the building, but also some of the strategies that we employed in terms of a net zero project. So we actually didn't start off with the intent of designing a net zero project. That was actually came out of a conversation of, well, what if we added solar panels, and then it sort of snowballed into this whole other project. So from the left to the right, adding the photovoltaic array and really maximizing the panels was key. bringing in an energy recovery ventilator system, inductive mini splits for our heating, cooling, and fresh air, looking at envelope air leakage, doing a blower door test. I think one thing that we didn't do here was pursue a passive house design, and I think if we were to do the project again, we would look at that more closely. So this ended up performing right about code for leakage, which was not. We were hoping for better than that, but it's tough in these older row houses where you have masonry walls between the units. High performance windows, obviously pretty straightforward. And then this was probably one of our first projects with a heat pump water heater, so a little bit of a learning curve there. And then, a classic, what we call English basement here in DC, where that lower level is a separate residential dwelling unit. And that's really a key from an economics perspective, because of that additional income that brings in helps to offset the cost of a lot of these other improvements. So this is, again, a picture when we started on the left. The previous owners had created this sort of ramshackle screen porch shack. Again, the mosquitoes come into play. That was detached from the home, which is a bit hard to see. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the end product. So there's quite a scale difference, and so I think one of the challenges is neighbors. And so I think we're right now, and we're seeing this evolution on this block and other blocks where more and more people are extending back and extending up. So right now it sticks out a little bit, but the idea was to try to compose something a little bit more contemporary as a counterpoint to the front. And so we used a combination of resawn wood here with some boral siding and some vertical metal siding to create a palette and a composition. And then having that, again, the open space that connects the living areas below. And then this is an image at the very top where we took that top level and we set it back a little bit and created some outdoor space. And it really, again, because we have there's a beautiful tree in front, so certain times of the year you have this wonderful treehouse experience. And another benefit of the site plan, which was happenstance, is that this is north facing, so in the spring, summer, fall, you're generally in a fair bit of shade, which is nice, particularly when it heats up. So as I mentioned, this is a net zero house. This is a passive house. I should also mention, in the interest of full disclosure, this is actually my house. And so this is my wife and I sitting on that porch, and it's a space that we really, really enjoy. So we feel extraordinarily fortunate to be able to have done the project and have it come out successfully and be able to occupy that porch. And this is a great reminder of like how my house used to look.
Yeah.
It doesn't look that way anymore. So I'm really curious amongst this audience, if you could estimate, and again, this is anonymous, this is really, just trying to get a rough sense, but what percentage of your projects are either net zero or passive, or maybe both? We broke it out to these percentages to sort of see how things were coming out. So it's great to see a little bit of activity in the 31 to 60, greater than 61. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
But, it sounds like a lot of you are in our position where there's a lot of talk, but not a lot of action. So
Yeah, we're certainly seeing it coming up more, but still the majority is not, I would say.
Yeah.
At least in our practice.
Great. So we wanted to move on into the next project. So Charles will take us through Ballston Duplex.
Great. So this is a project we're calling Ballston Duplex. So this is located in Arlington County, Virginia. Ballston is a neighborhood in Arlington County. So it's a fairly affluent suburb just outside of Washington, D.C. And in many other similar counties in the country, it really has a housing affordability issue. This county is also home to the Amazon HQ2 campus, so there's a lot of demand that has been being thrust upon Arlington County. It is also a location where there's a lot of tech industry, defense contracting, I would say government adjacent industries there. We'll see how that plays out over the next couple of years, but there's sort of a high demand for housing and a low ability to produce that. So when we started looking at this project, you can see again at the right, the before image. It's an existing little bungalow that was on this site. And the zoning at the time only allowed for single family houses. All of Arlington actually only either had single family zoning or large apartment building zoning. And there wasn't a whole lot of missing middle, as they would say, or in between sizes. So when we were approached on this site, the only thing that we could really build here as a by right is a large single family house, which would mean that these are going, now that price in this location would be $2.5 million, $3 million type of house. And our clients were not interested in doing that per se. So this project was located along a busy thoroughfare here. So this is Washington Boulevard that you're seeing in this image. And there was a little bit of a loophole in the zoning code that allowed us to go through an entitlements process to do a duplex here. There wasn't a lot of mechanisms for like a variance. There's Arlington only allowed for what they call a site plan process or a 4.1, which is part of their zoning regulations, which is similar to like a PUD process or a heavy. It's like a variance on steroids, and that was the only mechanism that was allowed to convert this to anything more than a single unit. So this one we did as a duplex. So that's sort of a precursor to how expensive this project is and how just grueling the entitlements process can be. So this is just for everybody, it's a 2019 project number that just was built last year, was finalized at the end of last year. So running parallel with our process that we were our clients elected to undertake, Arlington undertook a missing middle study that was kind of run on a parallel track with us, and they use a process that they're calling expanded housing option, and that was a zoning rewrite that was being taken through the approvals and the community feedback during the same time. And this image is just is kind of indicative of what you're seeing there. So half the community is for it, half the community is against it, and the community that tends to be against it already lives there, and the community that is for it wants to live there. And this is just one of the challenges that we're seeing here. This was ultimately approved. This missing middle upzoning was ultimately approved by the council, which would have allowed our project to be a by right project, but it was subsequently, there was a lawsuit against it, and it was subsequently overturned by a judge, and now it's kind of stuck in legal limbo, which was unfortunate because we had another project that we'd actually taken all the way to permits based on the upzoning, and our client was just holding land that he couldn't develop in the same way. So it's just some of the consequences that we're seeing out there in the communities. So just a quick strategy. We have this cute little animated graphic here, but the existing structure that was there really had been damaged and not maintained, so it didn't really make sense to retain it. So that was taken down as part of the project. The loophole that I described really requires the house to have two entrances off of the busy thoroughfare. So that's why we kept entrances along Washington Boulevard, which was like from an architectural standpoint, we really wanted the entrances on the less busy street, but we were kind of hemmed in to do that here. To get this project to pencil out, the units had to be fairly large units, which meant that we needed to have a third floor to this building. So from a massing standpoint, we really tried to concentrate the height in the center of the building and dropping the massing down as it tapers back towards the residential streets and the neighbor to the east. And then we added a series of porches to just help with the bringing the scale down to the human scale there at the entrances. So part of the project was subdividing the lots. So there's two lots that we've created here. This is a true duplex, so there's a party wall in the center. There's a common shared driveway that allows access off of the residential street to the plan, well, it's the west side, plan left. So there's common entrance. And then the first floor is primarily living spaces, kitchen, dining room, with the garages, and it's the units are mirrored across that dividing line in the center there. And here you can see the massing strategy playing out in the photographs of the final product. We're concentrating the height in the center of the mass and then stepping down at the edges as you go. And the building is actually symmetrical in plan, but it was really unique, really interesting to experience the two buildings because they do have a very different relationship to light. The unit on the right that you see here really feels like it's more nestled into the site and feels a little more intimate. And where while the unit on the left, on the western side, actually feels like it's kind of part of the street, just feels like another house on the street. So it's really interesting. It was something that was a little bit not anticipated in the design. While we had a very symmetrical planning strategy, the experiences of the two residences are feel quite different, which was kind of a fun thing to experience. Just some images of the ground floor. The functions or the public functions are really on the first floor. It's a very vertical house in that sense that you don't really experience it as a horizontal house. It's more of a vertical experience. So we really tried to put all the sort of public functions on the first floor and the quieter bedrooms and on the second floors here. And one of the things we tried to do is just introduce a lot of natural materials. We're using white oak and nice stones, but mostly natural materials as part of the project. The vertical circulation, we have an open central stair, and we really treated the light well. We put the stair up against the party wall, and part of what we were trying to do there is hide the fact that there was a party wall. So every time you're circulating through the building, we created this tower of light. So you're kind of always circulating through the light, and it never really feels like you're in a party wall. So that was one of our strategies here to make them feel like independent houses and not so much like you're part of a townhouse situation. And again, we just tried to capture as much natural light as we can. So where we could get 3 exposures. We tried to do that and really just tried to drive the light into these spaces as much as we could, really try to take advantage of it. And as Will mentioned, one of the things we always struggle with on these urban infill sites is we don't have, grass and dirt to kind of satisfy outdoor space requirements. So this project was a COVID baby, so that became really important to have access to outdoor spaces. So what we did here, and part of this is a reflection of the massing strategy, it also allowed us to do larger roof decks as we were stepping down. And then we actually have office spaces or sort of secondary bedrooms / office work from home spaces that open up onto this roof deck. So it's just this nice connection to the outdoors if you're working from home. And you can just see from this aerial photo a little bit of the context. So those larger buildings that you see in the distance there, that's Ballston neighborhood in Arlington, and that's where the metro is located. So it's about a half a mile away. So we had really great access to transit, which really helped to make this project really successful. And then, sustainability was a huge component of this project. So we just received our LEED Gold certification. You can see it's February 2025, so just last month. But in addition to that, it's also Energy Star certified. It's NetZero ready, so it's been certified for that. We have solar arrays. We have conduit ready. It's solar ready. Basically, the clients wanted to say that for the ultimate end user. But once the solar array is installed, it would qualify for LEED Platinum. It's also Department of Energy, EPA Indoor Air Quality Plus certified. So just on average, how long does it take your projects to go through the permitting process? So I think this is I think it's going to be near the end, at least for us. Tends to be on the longer side.
I think we need to move to another jurisdiction. A lot of people
Yeah, I
have
don't
less
know
than
where
three
you
months.
guys are at. Yeah, just for some context, that was a 2019 project number. So the entitlements on that project took about 3 years, and then the construction and the permitting was like another 8 to 10 months. So, and the construction was actually one of the shorter durations of the overall project timeline. Man, I need to move to wherever you guys are at. That's amazing. So we'll just jump to another project in scale. So Le Parc, go to the next slide. So very similar in the sense that we have some of these abandoned lots tend to be a pretty common site that we end up having to work with here. So you can see a little bit of a classic problem that we have in DC, where these single family homes, they get kind of orphaned on some of these larger thoroughfares. So this project is located in Cleveland Park, which is the historic district in Washington, D.C. It's about 2 blocks from the National Cathedral. Wisconsin Avenue is the major road you see on the right here. Where the truck is Macomb Street, which is a smaller neighborhood serving street. This site had a pretty beneficial underlying zoning. In DC, it was an RA4 zone, which allowed for medium to high density apartment building, and an FAR of up to 4 with inclusionary zoning, but the baseline was a 3.5 FAR and allowed for a 90-foot height limit, which you can see in the building on the right with the funny little gabled turrets. Is essentially the zoning envelope that could fit on this site. But you can see the conundrum we have is that the building is centered in the lot, and it was really limited to what we could do here. And this building was not technically landmarked, but it was considered a contributing structure to the historic district, so it was protected in that sense, and we could not tear it down. So then what do we do? So we had to get pretty creative. So we had studied the site pretty heavily, and it seemed that if we could, really just move the house, we could free up the corner along Wisconsin Avenue for a new apartment building. So our strategy here was to demo a non-historic portion, a rear addition on the house, move the house and rotate it to align with the existing historic houses along Macomb, and that would free up a zone on the right side, which was a continuation of the street frontage along Wisconsin Avenue, and we could take advantage of the full zoning envelope there. That's a cool diagram, but obviously, things are not nearly that easy. So here's a couple images of the house as it's being moved. Initially, the way that we did this is we had to lift the house up on cribbing, demo the foundation that was under the existing house, excavate and pour the new foundations, which had to be very precise because it had to line up with the house. And as you can tell, it's a 100-year-old house. It's not very square. And then we had to somehow manage to turn it 90 degrees and slide it over on a very tight urban lot, which you can see is a pretty heavy logistical feat. It was a fun day for the office. We all went out and watched this because we don't get to do this very often. And a shout out to expert home movers. These guys are incredible. If you ever need to raise a house or move a lighthouse, or these guys actually have moved lighthouses, so that's how we learned about it. So this is, I'm gonna jump ahead to the final product, but I'll do a quick summary of the entitlements. I'm not going to bore you too much, but again, this is a project from 2019, and it was just delivered last year. So the process that we had to go through on this one, so we had taken those initial concepts to historic to get those approved as a conceptual idea. which took about a year for us to get through that portion of the entitlement process. And then because of some of the uniqueness of DC and the zoning regulations, we had to create what's called a theoretical lot. So this is, even though these lots it looks like a single lot, we wanted to use, essentially what we're trying to do is borrow the FAR from the existing house and use it on the apartment tower. But DC only allows you to build one building on one record lot. So there was a little bit of just zoning craziness we had to do to utilize the air rights essentially over the existing house to build the tower. And that was a process that we had to undertake after we got sign off from historic. So that took about another 6 to 8 months. And then once we get those in place, then we can file for building permits, which, we needed to do the drawings, as most of you guys know, and then file for building permits. So that took another year and a half, basically. So, all told, we're in the 2.5 years or so of entitlements on this project. Just a quick site plan. You can see the relocated existing house on the right with the wraparound porch. There's an imaginary line between that and the apartment building to the left. And what we're doing here is we're using the FAR for the entire site to build the apartment building. And one thing that we wanted to do was have the house be a fee simple house. So we created what's called a tax lot in DC that allows that to be sold as a fee simple project. And as you move up in the building, this is a typical floor plan. You can see the roof plan of the historic house on the right. This is essentially just a single unit per floor. The second floor has 2 units, but the typical floor is just a single unit per floor. The core factor is pretty high on this one. So, this is a little bit of a poster child for what we'll talk about later is the point access blocks where you can do a single stair, single means of egress building. But you can see just the amount of core that we needed to have to get this to work. And the layouts are really 2-bedroom units. And it does have a nice exposure because you get 3 exposures around the building. This is just an image of that, the typical living space of the typical unit. DC does have an inclusionary zoning regulations that kick in after 10 apartment units. And what that really means is that there's an affordable, you need to provide an affordable apartment once you reach that threshold. And DC incentivizes this process with an additional bonus density to help underwrite those affordable units. And to be just totally frank about it, on this project, the financials of that unit didn't really make sense. So we designed this building to be 9 units. And part of that was just like the margins that we were dealing with and getting the numbers to pencil out with carrying costs to, these site complexities, the escalation in construction costs, just put too much financial pressure on it. And because of the way the site was configured, we actually couldn't utilize any additional bonus density. We're kind of stuck with the footprints that we could do. So we couldn't actually even add any more density to help underwrite those affordable units. So these are more on the, I wouldn't call them like ultra luxury, but they are on the higher end of what you would see. One thing that we have in DC is a tradition of what they call bay projections or bay windows. If you've ever been in DC and walked through some of the row house neighborhoods and you see the nice bay fronts, those are technically in public space. And that is something that was part of the master planning of DC. These things are little bits of bonus density for us. So we can actually, it doesn't count against our baseline FARs. It doesn't count against our lot occupancies or coverage. And they also just sort of bring a nice livable expression along the street fronts, gives it a lot of character. So that's one thing that we tend to take advantage of in DC. Balconies are also allowed to project there, so we really took advantage of those on the north side here to just give you, more outdoor space. Again, this is a COVID experience, so those outdoor spaces were really important. Um, I think this is pretty indicative of the types of lots that we have left in DC that are at this scale. They're complicated. All the easy ones are already done. So we end up having to find these solutions and get pretty creative about how we can add density to some of these locations. And this was a very successful project. It delivered after the rise in interest rates, but the apartment building sold out in about 2 weeks. So that was a very successful project for us. And just a quick question of which construction types represent the majority of your work. I'm just kind of curious to see.
Also a good test to make sure folks haven't
Yeah,
dozed off
and
a
if
little bit.
anybody's fallen asleep yet, hopefully not. That's the next slider question. Are you asleep?
Yeah, I think this generally aligns with where our work, most of our work is type 5, more
Yeah.
frame construction with some type 3 and then less
A little bit of
type 1
podium.
and podium.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty similar to us.
great. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing. So we have another built project that we wanted to talk about tonight, and then we'll move on to our final project. But the collection at R Street is a project that is really represents a number of different types of projects all in one opportunity or one project. It was a great opportunity for us. So it starts with the existing Morse School, which was transformed into the offices of AfriCare, which is a nonprofit focused on providing service and support to African nations. They ended up merging with another entity and had no longer needed the building, and so they sold the building to our client. But the building itself was surrounded by open space, which again is relatively rare in DC. So on one side, the west side, there was an existing parking lot, and then on the east side, they also owned a trapezoidal shaped property on the corner, which we affectionately refer to as the wedge lot. So our proposed strategy here was to convert that school building, which had been converted into an office building, and now it's taking its third act as an apartment building with 12 condominium units. On the west side of the site, we ended up with an additional 9 units. 3 of the 4 buildings are traditional flats, and then the last building is a single family. Again, there was an interest on the part of our client to maximize the different types of product on the site. And the wedge lot is a classic duplex where it's very similar to the Ballston project we saw previously with a 2 units sort of side by side. So this is an image of as it exists today after the restoration. I think one of the interesting parts of the project, so it was an adaptive reuse. The building wasn't in a historic district, but the DC zoning code incentivizes you to keep these existing non-residential buildings and convert them to residential use. So there's a real benefit to keeping the building and restoring it. The other part of this is that the building, while historic looking, wasn't technically historic. And so one of the recommendations here that was made during the process was to voluntarily embark on the landmark process. And what that did is it reduced risk for our client. And by controlling the landmark process and by pursuing it ourselves, it allowed us to have more, essentially control over the end product. And so part of that was working with a historic consultant, which we have a lot of great ones here in DC, to develop a preservation plan, to get into the building's history, identify the important characteristics. But it's really the heart of the development. And you can see there's a wing on the right-hand side that represents the intervention that was done in the 70s or 80s to when it was converted to an office. So the plan of the diagram rather of the school building is essentially 4 rooms grouped around a center space. In its version as an office, they created a large 3-story atrium, which was quite dramatic with a large curved stair on one side. And so it wasn't entirely practical for converting that atrium space into residential units. And because the atrium wasn't original, it wasn't part of the character defining element of the building. So we had a little bit more flexibility. But our strategy here was really to take those four what were classrooms that had been converted to office and return each of those four into units, and also to create utilize the east-west E-train space as the primary circulation. So again, from a core factor, it's quite a large amount of corridor and common area as it is versus the units, but it was a part of the character of the school itself. So this is an image on the left-hand side of that common space that we created that serves as the access point. And one of the ideas was to give some sense of a double height space, and so we created a bridge element that goes from one landing to the next to get into the upper level units. And then on the right-hand side is what is the dining room of one of the larger units. And again, this was a space that previously had a stair in it. The stair was removed, and then we put a floor in, and they created this really dramatic dining space. Structure was hugely important to this. The building originally constructed as masonry bearing walls, and one of the challenges we ran into is that many of those bearing walls had to be removed in order for the layouts to really work. And so, with our client, we embarked on a program of removing some of those. So what you're seeing in the diagram on the right is the lighter blue are walls that were removed, the red were walls that will remain, and there were these amazing trusses that kept the roof up. And so we did quite a lot of structural gymnastics in order to keep the roof up and maintain the roof structure. But in most cases, we augmented the existing floors by sistering on some lumber. But I think the real takeaway here, we talked a little bit about this when we did our talk at National, it was to really, it was very important to understand the diagram of the structural system of the building. This ended up being a really relatively costly endeavor to do all this work, and I don't think that the general contractor who worked with us, I don't think they really understood what they were getting into, and so it was once they finally got into it, it was a little bit too late, and so I think in retrospect, we probably would have pushed a little bit harder to try to keep more of those masonry walls just to minimize how much shoring had to be done on the project. So moving to the west here, we're looking at the four structures that were created. Three of these are flats. The last one on the right-hand side here is a single-family residence. I think, again, picking up on what Charles had mentioned in the previous project is our use of bays. And so it's a very common feature for us to take advantage of here in the city, but it also really contributes to the streetscape and makes the streetscape enriches the streetscape. And so here you're seeing those bays, which are technically not on private property. So these are all extensions into the public right of way. But it was a very smart urban design initiative that was proposed. I'm not even sure when it was proposed, but it's really, I think, it enriched a lot of the neighborhoods in DC. So for a while, there was a real push to do what's called a 2/2. And so you're seeing that diagrammatically here on the right-hand side, where you took a three-story building, you dug out the basement, and you did a unit below and you did a unit above. And so you're seeing that unit 2, the blue above, which is always a little bit nicer, right? You have access to the roof, you have more light, etc. But I think the market really had kind of been saturated with the 2/2 model, and I think that often the upper level unit would sell very quickly, and everyone would be very happy with it. In the lower level unit, you would often put the living area on the ground floor and the bedrooms in the basement. So there was always this bias against having that arrangement. And so we worked with our client, and we've tested this out a couple of iterations where we call vertical flats. And so instead of separating these units horizontally, we actually separate them vertically. So we have a front unit that faces the street, and then a second unit that faces the rear. And so it gives you very different characteristics for the unit, but there's a parity there. And it also gives you the opportunity to get up on the roof for both of these, which is a very important thing, as we previously mentioned. So to do that, it's a little challenging. And so the diagram on the right here illustrates the access. So on the left portion here is the ground floor plan, where you have a common entrance and a hallway that leads to the rear unit, where we have the living room and dining room area, and then the front unit, the living and dining is above. But then it was also important to be able to get from the front unit to the back unit, where the parking, to the back rather, where you have parking and trash and services and recycling, etc. And so, we created a similar corridor at the bottom. And so that kind of interlocking relationship is actually proven to be pretty useful. It allows us to kind of get some services into the building that would have otherwise been more challenging to do. Again, light is really important. And so here, the image on the left is of the single family row house where we actually have a dog leg, which is another characteristic of some of the work that we do. And that allows you to introduce more light into the deeper spaces. We mentioned the roof decks. Again, almost all of our work has some dimension of roof occupation. This is actually the lowered roof deck on the single family. There's also a really great experience on the vertical flats where you have a roof deck at the front and a roof deck at the rear. And so there's this great moment at the top of the stairs when you can look over, hopefully you get along with your neighbor. But it really comes in handy when you're looking for a place to watch the 4th of July fireworks and just generally inhabit the top plane of the city. And then finally moving on to the duplex. This is where we have a more traditional side-by-side arrangement. And so here, we spent some time looking at where the entrances were going to be and ultimately decided that having the entrances sort of together, so there was a sense of engagement with the neighbor, which is sort of a pattern of development that you see up and down the streets in this particular neighborhood and really throughout DC, as opposed to sort of two separate entrances, was important. It also allowed us to create very kind of abundant outdoor space at the ground floor, which is somewhat rare for these kinds of projects. And so what you're seeing also is the pattern in the lower right-hand corner of picking up those bay and the reading of a bay, as well as the porch and stoop elements of the surrounding neighborhood. So I think it really underscores one of the points, one of those learning objectives about spending a little bit of time understanding what the context of the neighborhood is, looking at some of the strategies there for design flows. And maybe it's a different formal language, but you're sort of picking up on some of those use patterns. So the shape of these was actually dictated by something that no one ever sees, but there is a very large diameter, about a 10-foot diameter sewer that comes down our street and then curves down New Jersey. And so we were required by
New Jersey Avenue.
New Jersey Avenue. Good point. Yeah. And so because of this, our local water utility is very, very specific about what can be built, not just on top of it, but also within the zone of influence. And so we could have built over top of it if we'd gone with a deep foundation, which would have just not been economical with a project of this size. But so we ended up setting this back, and I think it actually worked to be a benefit. So again, going back to this notion of just understanding your project constraints and ultimately enriching the project, allowed us to create really ample outdoor space for both the units. And these were some of the first units that were sold because of the sort of perceived abundance of outdoor space that was somewhat unique. So they didn't actually have side yards, or rear yards rather, because of the orientation of the site, but we had all this space on the side. And so on the left-hand side, you can get a sense of how we stepped down that bay as it got closer to the adjacent construction. It also allowed us an opportunity to get up to the upper level roof deck. And so here you're on the right-hand side, you're seeing an image of the roof deck on the wedge lot, where you exit out on the 3rd floor and then a spiral stair takes you up and really kind of creates this we're always just enamored by the landscape of the roads in DC and the ability to get up there. And so it's great to be able to share that. So the overall site plan here just illustrates the building itself. And then on the left-hand side, those row homes. I think one item of note here is the parking piece. And so in DC, different zones have different parking requirements. And so, for example, in a row house, you need to provide 1 parking space for every 2 dwelling units. But when you get to an apartment building, that ratio drops significantly. And so for 12 units, we're only required to provide 6 parking spaces. So we also wanted to gauge the type of work that this group does, specifically how much of your work is adaptive reuse and or historic preservation. Is it a significant portion? Is it an insignificant portion? In DC, it seems like every neighborhood has a historic district, but it's not quite accurate. But we do.
There's a lot.
we do quite a lot of work in and around historic districts. And I think actually, sometimes it can be a little bit of heartache, but I think in general, they really enrich the final product. And we do fundamentally believe in historic preservation and the value that it does give to a city.
Interesting. Yeah, I would say ours is probably more than 50 in the city, and then interesting.
Super interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks. So we'll pivot to our last project here, which I think represents something we're definitely interested in. I think there's a little bit of a, it's kind of the new puppy on the block, but a lot of folks are really pushing this what we call point out access blocks or single means of egress buildings. So this is an ideas competition that uh, we entered just recently. This was in Denver, and they had sponsored this project to explore an urban site, which is very similar to the types of projects we do in DC. And just to give you a quick, overview of what this entails, the short summary of it is any building over 3 stories needs 2 stairs out of it. So um, what the point access block or the single means of egress building looks to do is extend that up to maybe 6 stories with a single stair, which would just unlock quite a bit of density. If you saw the project that we were looking at with Parc, you can see that's a pretty quintessential type of project where you have to have 2 stairs out of the building and an elevator, and your core factor and your ability to produce housing units is really compromised. So what we were looking at here, the full zoning envelope, we did some studies, some massing studies, just to try to understand what we could do here. But this lot was very similar to an urban lot that we'd have in the city. It was about 45 feet wide and about 100 feet deep. So very typical lot sizes. So this was just some strategies that we were looking at to really just massing strategies about ways that we can open up the building and to see what forms make the most sense from a efficiency standpoint. So the big solution that we were looking at here was really trying to keep a side yard on the south side of it, introducing a single stair, a single elevator core in the center, and then arraying the units off of that. This is the ground floor plan. So we were proposing a cafe space on the front side, some live work units, and then bike storage and some car charge sharing station, car sharing stations in the back. So this is our initial ground floor plan. And this is the more typical footprint. So we have a central stair. All the units are accessed off of that central circulation area. So that would be unit keynote 1 and keynote 5 is the elevator. So one thing that the point access blocks allow is the ability to, essentially changing that other stair, that second stair that you would need for an elevator. So a lot of times on these urban lots, we elect not to put elevators in because of the core factor. Once you sort of factor in 2 stairs and elevator, it's just reaches a point where it just doesn't make viable sense. You're giving up 25% of your footprint or more to core. And so one of the things that we're looking at here is really trying to keep a modular unit type. So unit 8 and unit 7. So we have 2 different unit types, but we've introduced the ability to expand through some punch outs. So these units, there's a lot of flexibility in age in place. The units can actually adapt over time to the end user. And then again, trying to take advantage of outdoor roof space. So this project was designed for Denver, so we were trying to get up high, trying to use basically 2 different kinds of outdoor experiences. One that we were calling the nature walk on the right side, and one that was more for sort of public functions on the left side. But the central stair, the sculptural stair, would drive up to the roof. And do you want to take this slide, Will?
Yeah, so I think part of the approach here was to think about ways in which we could incorporate sustainable strategies, and so it was designed to be both a net zero and a passive house. So it included the sort of typical things about continuous insulation and all electric, but We also were interested in exploring the possibilities of mass timber. It's not something that we've been able to do yet in our practice, but that was one of the dimensions we were trying to bring to the ideas competition. But also, this notion about creating an outdoor space in the middle. So I think there was a decision early on to separate the two halves of the building, and instead of creating an internalized stairs, create an external stair, and the ventilation properties that affords and creating that chimney effect, I think was something that was really important. The image on the left here is that entry sequence. And so it was very important for us to think about the ground plane. And what we wanted to do was create an opportunity for a small cafe. It's in the middle of a residential neighborhood. The nearest sort of commercial space is 3 or 4 blocks away. And so just the density that we're adding here and the surrounding density we felt could probably support that. But, creating that adjacent commercial or retail experience as you're coming in and out of the building was important. On the right-hand side, trying to think about the kit of parts and trying to think about the panelization of the flooring system, thinking about the exterior wall system, thinking about the kitchen and bathroom as being sort of a set of cassettes or things that could be modularized to some degree, and really trying to take all those things that we wish we had done and put them into a project. So it was really fun to kind of experiment with that. One of the things that we discovered in Denver is just there's an abundance of porches. And so there's a long history actually of porches and outdoor space in Denver that relates to tuberculosis and all things. And so we decided to take the south side of the building and really create mini outdoor spaces, and having each of the units we're also not constrained by a client who's pressuring us to get rid of them, but really to make sure we had a lot of outdoor living space. And really, we're up, this actually happens to be in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Denver. And so you're able to get these amazing views out to the mountains. And then thinking about the unit flexibility. And so those units can kind of expand to the side, expand up or down, or potentially some live work units as well. And so really trying to build that module in to future-proof the building. Again, on the left-hand side here was thinking about the experience on the roof, really trying to activate that roof, not just for an individual unit, but also as a common space. It could be a space for the building, and using the photovoltaic array above as a means to provide some shade and shelter. And so we're thinking about all those different components of that solar canopy, those porches that are added on to those core elements. So trying to modularize this to the maximum extent possible. And so I think this is really something that we see as the next step in the practice. Charles, in his capacity as co-chair of the DCBI Housing Committee, held a panel discussion just last month, actually.
Yeah.
With our chief building official and a major developer, and really explored the ideas about what does this mean, looking to places like Seattle and New York City where they've adopted this already, starting to think about is this a viable strategy, and we think that it is, particularly in these relatively low density buildings, be able to utilize that single stair.
Yeah, I think we think it's really the future of unlocking a lot of these urban lots. It just frees up, the ability to produce the housing, but it just unlocks the financials that seem to have gotten a lot tighter in the last few years, and getting these projects to pencil out can make a big difference.
I mean, it's amazing to think we attended the conference here, which was in our own town last year, we went to a seminar. There were some folks that presented this idea, and it was really wild because I had a call a couple days later from a client who said, I can't, did you hear about this thing? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. They said, I went to this great session about point access blocks. And I was like, I was there.
Yeah.
And so it was great to kind of connect and really get excited about it. So it was wonderful to have that opportunity to test these ideas out in architectural capacity, and I think hopefully be part of the change here in DC to bring these buildings to life. So we're curious, folks' general familiarity with point access blocks or single means of egress stairs. So if it's something you've never heard of, but you've heard of them, but haven't had a chance to work on one. Maybe you're in the process of designing one or have completed one. So curious to see how hopefully we're spreading the gospel here. If folks have never heard of this, so
spread this around.
Yeah, I think there's a number of resources.
There are. It's called like Center for Architecture, I think. Is
Center for Building North America is out of New York, and they have a great tracker that talks about which jurisdictions have started looking at this, which jurisdictions have already adopted it. So
yeah, I mean, I think one thing to think about is the point access block is essentially a garden apartment, garden style apartment that just has more floors.
and I love that we have some folks who've completed and have already designed it.
Oh man,
That's
nice.
great.
That's fantastic. Yeah, great.
So, in terms of those takeaways, I think that architecture is a very local act. Most of our work is in DC, and we've gotten to be somewhat. I would hate to use the word expert, but we know a lot about it, and so it's so important to be very familiar with local zoning and local sort of approvals processes. So that's a key thing to do, and I'm sure most of you already know that. Another piece that's not architectural at all, but has a huge impact on building and urban environments is just managing neighbor expectations. Construction, as we all know, is a difficult and challenging process. It can it can get really dirty, it can get messy, it's certainly loud and disruptive. And so I think being transparent and honest with neighbors, I think we always advocate for our neighbors, our clients rather, to engage with their neighbors and try to have an agreement in place about what's going to happen and who to call and that kind of thing. I think that we have the opportunity to look at a variety of different housing or unit types, and so hopefully this is perhaps has opened the door for somebody to sort of think about things in a little different way in terms of some of the units that you might take on. The number 4 was just the challenges of entitlements. I mean, 2 of these projects are 5-year projects from start to finish, and so it takes a long time. And it kind of goes back to this notion about what do we need to do at a societal level to sort of rethink this building process. Particularly against the context of a housing shortage, right? And so it's just not. A lot of these things are not practical. They're not practical, but they just contribute so much to the cost of construction, the cost of housing. And then finally, I think studying the context to think about what are those general density clues, whether it's understanding the language of the street, of porches, bays, even window. A lot of times we will embark on a study of looking at window proportions along a street to come up with clues. So, all right. So these are the questions that we're not going to answer. I think there's some questions in the Q&A that maybe Sloan or Rushi were going to moderate. So hopefully we've still have a couple folks left joining us. I know it's a little bit late.
Thank you, Charles and Will, for the wonderful presentation and sharing your projects with all of us. I can start taking the questions now. Audience, please feel free to type your questions and we'll address them one by one. The first question we have is from Marcel. I worked as an architect and developer. One of the issues I run into is the cost of construction to build the project, which is too high per unit to make it financially feasible. Can you share the construction cost involved for this project? The second one is also kind of a follow-up question. It's the dollar per square foot cost for the duplex project.
Sure. Yeah, I think one sort of dirty little secret about these is that most of those projects that took the long entitlement processes were self-performed. So we were working directly with a developer who was also had a GC arm. So that helped get those financials to work a little bit better. To the point where, that low Parc one, the tower probably would not have been feasible under any other sort of structure. The cost on the duplex, I think it came in about $275 a square foot. Just construction costs. That doesn't include any of the soft costs and the entitlement. And, it wasn't just my costs on there. There was lawyers and a lot of that kind of stuff that played into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that generally a lot of the work that we see that is financial viable is where the developer actually partners up with the general contractor and doesn't directly hire the general contractor, because I think the economics don't seem to make sense. You really need to have you need to partner up with a GC who is a true partner, right? Who's not, sitting on the opposite side of the table trying to change order you to death. So like the collection at our street was a project where the developer hired a contractor, a general contractor. And so that was, quite frankly, a more difficult process. It was more expensive, I think, than it needed to be. It was certainly more contentious at times than it needed to be. And so I think that what we've seen from a development perspective is having that GC as a partner, not a traditional owner contractor relationship.
Yeah.
And I, you know, but
Duplex project was like the completion date was which year? Because the 275 that you just mentioned, what was the completion date for that?
That was last year, and that was the self-performed project, so it was around 275. You know, we're seeing north of 300 for most of these projects now. But
Okay, thank you.
yeah, it's funny. We've seen just tremendous escalation, even in like a 5-year time frame, right?
I'm sure you guys are seeing it too. It's just everything's expensive.
What was what was between 200 and 250 5 years ago is now 325 to 350 or 375, which is just mind blowing. But
Yeah.
Let's see. The next question is from Wes. What are the IZ requirements there?
Yeah. So the IZ requirements in the city, the DC has specific IZ requirements, and I assume you're asking me about those. So any apartment building that's more than 10 units, that's when the inclusionary zoning program kicks in. And that the sort of easy answer, it's about 10% of your gross construction needs to be set aside for IZ units. So if you built a 10,000 square foot building, 1,000 of it would have to be dedicated to an inclusionary zoning unit.
That being said, though, they could not have made a more complicated system.
I very much distilled that down to the easiest answer possible. It's way more complicated than that.
Well, it's not that it's complicated. It's the way in which there's a number of rules and regulations with where you put that space, how you calculate that space. The sort of the mechanics of that. We're still only 5 years in, maybe a little bit longer on the IZ process, and so I would say it's not uncommon for us to have projects where we've cleared all the other disciplines, we've cleared all the other sort of built parameters, right? Like we've cleared life safety, all that stuff, and we're arguing over like when we're going to get invoiced for the $250 IZ fee, which is just
it's
incredibly frustrating.
It's very, very frustrating,
right?
But I mean, I think it came from the IZ program in DC came from good intentions. I think there's a lot of good things that happen with it. And part of how they went about doing it is they incentivize the IZ. So you get bonus density or bonus square footage to use to offset the IZ units. But it's pretty complicated.
But it's also, I think, been pretty successful.
It's been pretty successful.
There's been a tremendous amount.
More so on the rental side of things than the for sale side of things that we've seen.
The other tool to IZ that is used, and I can't remember if we came across any of these projects, but we were allowed to do penthouses, which is above our zoning height limit. And so to do that, clients or developers need to pay into what's called a housing production trust fund. And so that space has turned out to be very valuable from you're getting essentially free FAR for a price, and so that money is put into a pool, and then that pool is then given to other projects that have more affordable dimension in the city, and so it's
through grants,
yeah. But it's not so we're attacking IZ and inclusionary zoning and affordable housing in two different ways, and I think they're both successful. So it's a little it's a headache for us, but I think overall it's the direction that we should be going in and providing more of those opportunities.
Our next question is about the parking. You can shed some light over the single family, row housing, or apartment. What are the basic regulations for parking for such projects?
Yeah, so the in DC, a row house is 1 per 2. So we'd have to provide, if we have a 2 unit, we'd have to provide a single parking space. The apartment building is usually a 1 per 3 ratio, but you can get more reductions if you're close to metro or a priority bus line, so that gets to 1 to 6 ratio. That apartment building that we showed, the Parc, that was actually one of the pieces of zoning relief we asked for was to eliminate some of the parking requirements there, partially because it was, it's right on a major thoroughfare and it's very close to the metro, so it's very transit oriented. And DC's generally been receptive of relief around that.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting, we went through a major zoning rewrite in 2016. And one of the most significant changes that was made were in these mid-rise districts where they significantly reduced the parking from what would have been 1 per 2 dwelling units down to, in some cases, 1 per 6 dwelling units. And that just unlocked tremendous amounts of development potential. And so the question is, well, where do people park? And so part of the answer is people don't park because they don't have cars, right? We've seen an explosion of we have a really robust bike share system and now scooter share system. We have stories of clients who have parking spaces that they'll often sell. They'll deed them separately and they'll go unsold. People aren't willing to pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for just a parking space. And so generally the market seems to have adapted pretty well to the lack of parking. We are fortunate. We live in a very walkable city.
Very walkable and dense.
Both of us
compact.
Both of us can walk to work, which is kind of a great thing. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Thank you.
The next one's from Ron. Nice work. Can you share a few effective strategies for convincing the public and local authorities to accept higher densities in bulk and single family neighborhoods, i.e. winning arguments for missing middle housing?
I was hoping you would give me some. It's very difficult. I will say that certain neighborhoods in DC are tougher than others. DuPont Circle, which is historically had been really tough, and that's one of the sort of denser parts of DC where there's a lot of like these nice browns, what you guys would call brownstones or townhouses there, row houses. I will say that they've gotten more flexible about it. There are other wards in the city or like neighborhoods in the city where it is a fight. And it's mostly around those areas where parking is really a premium and there's less services. I would say that's where we're seeing more of a contention of where, basically the infrastructure hasn't caught up to the idea of missing middle. And I think that was one of the bigger issues that I would say was a criticism of the Arlington rollout, is that they sort of did it as a blanket. They try to incentivize some of that transit-oriented thing, like you can do a little more density in those transit-oriented areas, but there were some areas that are just like totally suburban and dropping like a 4 or 6 unit building in a traditionally single family neighborhood that's far from amenities or transit is a tougher sell, I would say. So some of it just depends on which neighborhoods you're looking at and going in there with a massing strategy that is more contextual, I think, in bringing those the scale of those things down is sort of the beginning of how you win that argument, in my opinion.
I think the other piece to that is, people generally like to live in walkable neighborhoods. Like if you ask somebody, would you like to live in? They say, yeah, sure, I'd like to live in. So in order for walkable neighborhoods to work, you need to increase density, right? And so that's the harder sell. So if you want to have like a corner store that you can walk to pick up milk or bread or whatever your kid forgot, to do that, you need to have a certain number of people that can do that around there. And so that's been part of it. Arlington is in DC, they're very similar actually, right? Because we have very hyper urban areas and we have very hyper suburban areas. And so, it's difficult to convince the general public. I think local authorities generally are much more receptive to it. They're, planners are generally on board with this. It's the public and people who do not want to see this at all that can be a challenge. So,
and one thing that we run into in DC a lot, and you guys probably see this, you can't really throw a rock without hitting a lawyer in DC. And there's just a lot of folks with a lot of resources to fight change. So we see that in some of these wards where, it makes a whole lot of sense. We had a project that was about a 21 unit apartment building that we were doing that was in a ward it's Ward 3 in the city, which is like notoriously like the most affluent ward in the city, and they just have the resources to fight stuff. They just don't want change, and they don't want it to happen quickly, and they know how to play the game, and they know how to push it out. And we run into that quite a bit. It's just part of the fight, I guess. That's why we get paid the bucks.
The next question, I think this is more geared towards the greenhouse project. The question is, how do you exit to the public way from the stairway at the ground level? Don't you have to walk underneath the building on the ground floor?
Yeah, so this is, I think this kind of daylights some of the challenges with point access blocks. So the glib answer is like we didn't have to worry about it, right? Because it was a competition entry. But what was really instrumental was like thinking about, like we spent a whole, I don't know, week on just like trying to struggling to understand the travel distances, because part of the requirements are 4 units per floor and like 125-foot travel distance. And so I think that's a really great question about how, when you put the stair in the middle like that, and you externalize the stair, how do you get out to a public right of way? What kind of things are required there? So it's a challenge, and I think that what was really valuable and why we took it on. We don't do a lot of competition in the office, but it was really, we started to kind of brush up against those issues, and so the nice part was saying, oh, we don't have to worry about it today because this is a conceptual project, but it really kind of planted the seed of like thinking about the code implications and the fire safety implications.
And that's part of the reason why we were looking at mass timber is really the char effects, and like that that thing is really a multi-hour burn on it to get out, and the occupancy loads are pretty low, really, and it's a sprinkler building, so it's sort of a weighing of those life safety issues that really statistically like that unsafe to do that.
Thank you.
That actually hits 2 other questions, I think. So let's see here. Are there grants or other funding available for these types of projects?
I haven't heard of any grants available for or at least some of these accelerators around mass timber that we're starting to see. It would be interesting to see if there's any funding. We did do a sort of a, not really a symposium, but a roundtable here in DC about it with a building official, and we were exploring some options to maybe do sort of a test case, or at least setting up some parameters for how you could go about it. Which I think the incentive would be if you could guarantee that you could do it from a code standpoint. I think it makes the financials of the project a lot better. So you might not need a grant; you can just get it funded.
Yeah, I think one tool that's not necessarily a grant or funding, it actually costs more money, but we have an accelerated plan review program in DC that was introduced several years ago. And what it does is it brings a level of predictability to the review process. And so in a development situation where time is money, right? Every month is additional carrying costs. If you can say, the challenge right now is that if you don't do that process, it could be 6 months, it could be 18 months. Really, I mean, that's the scale of this, right? And so that can make or break a project. And so pursuing projects in this accelerated plan review allows you some predictability where you can generally get it. You do everything right, you can generally get it in 2 to 3 months. Which is a significant advantage for our clients.
We have our next question about the point access block, so the single stair. There are 2 questions about it. Where can we learn more about it? And what is your argument about the fire safety in case of a single stair? I know there was a lot of discussion on this in New Jersey also.
Discussion about that. Yeah, I think that the single stair, it's a pretty common housing type in Europe and some of the other countries. And we actually engaged with a code reviewer here that actually helps write the model code. And he was very, part of part of the myth about the second stair is actually people don't usually. He had some pretty interesting statistics that like fire deaths through a fully sprinklered building, even with two stairs, is really minimal. Like, or even with a single stair, is really minimal. There's only like 30 deaths in like a 10-year period or something like that that are related to the egress pathway. So I think like the statistics, when you actually start looking at the data, are pretty. These are pretty safe buildings.
Well, I think, I mean, Eric makes a really good point, which is that, we build buildings generally much safer than ever before, right? We have fire sprinkler systems, which are just statistically demonstrating saving lives, fire alarm systems, smoke detection. We have all these things that we've elevated the quality of the buildings. And so and he's a former firefighter. He'll be the first one to tell you that he's pulled, bodies out of buildings in his life. And so he takes this stuff very seriously, but he strongly feels that, and he's not alone, that we have really made buildings considerably safer. And so, the kind of benefits and help both, there's a whole accessibility dimension we didn't even talk about yet about point access block, but there's all these benefits that, not that they outweigh the risk, but that the risk has been mitigated because we've made buildings safer, that now should open the door to these enhancements at a societal level in terms of being able to provide, more buildings with elevator access, more buildings with better air and light and that kind of thing. So I think that was pretty compelling.
And these are already in place in some jurisdictions. So Seattle's had essentially this allowable in the building code for almost 20 years now. I know New York City has similar requirements. So what they do is, they allow that, but then you have to pepper in other things to increase life safety. So either the stairways need to be a little bit wider, or there's sprinklered, or there's separation between the elevator and the stair. And that's what we're seeing more of, is that there's no sort of universal sort of code formula for it. So I think one of the things that the code council is looking at is trying to standardize that in the future code cycles.
So in terms of that other question about learning more, Center for Building North America is a great resource. And be happy if you want to reach out to us separately. I think we forgot to put up our contact information slide, but I'm sure you can reach out.
Yeah, you can reach out to us. There's a couple of resources online that are really good. There's one called Larch Lab, I think, that is also a good one to look into.
Okay, I'll reach out separately and get all the links on the Slack network channel. Thank you.
Here, next question is from Alice. What drove making a single family unit at the upper end of the site for the collective?
Yeah, great question. Again, it was really driven by the desire to provide a full range of housing typologies. They felt like the developers in that situation felt that they could capture more dollars per square foot from a revenue basis there. And so they wanted there just to be, it kind of, by diversifying the typologies there, protected their investment. So.
The next question we have from Nate: are these projects designed to house residents who are in the 60% to 120% AMI range? The missing middle housing we are working in Southern California are comprised exclusively of 500 square feet studio or 650 square feet one bedroom units typically.
Yeah, the inclusionary zoning program is limited to 60% and 50, 60, and 80% AMI or MFI, what they call it here. And the way they rolled that out in DC, there's you're required to provide a diversity of unit types, so you can't sort of just do them all as studios or one bedrooms, and they really want you to provide more, closer to family size units, so 2 bedrooms and 3 bedroom units. So that's the sort of typical range. We're not providing workforce housing in that 120, AMI range as part of an inclusionary zoning program, but there's a couple of other programs in DC that allow for this workforce housing. The majority of these projects are market rate, and I think that some of those are what you would consider as kind of attainable housing. I wouldn't put it in the bucket of affordable housing, but it's closer to something you can afford. So that duplex we did in Ballston, actually it sold pretty well, but there's only 2 units there, and like the options in Ballston are either a condo and a high rise or a single family house that's $3 million. So you getting down to like the $1 million range starts to feel closer to affordable, even though that's still a big bucket of money.
I think the other thing too is that part of the intricacy of our IZ regulations are prohibit you from making all of the units 500 square foot studios, right? You just can't do that, right, and
Yes.
comply with the regulations. And so we spend a lot of time kind of discussing and massaging and getting 2 and sometimes 3 bedroom units, because when it's a percentage of the space, sometimes it's more economical to do one larger 3 bedroom unit than it is to do sort of 2 smaller units. And so it's very much a calculus, and we work very closely with our clients to figure out what is the right mix and trying to economize. And the other thing is the rental rates and the sales rates differ. So a 1 bedroom obviously sells for less than a 2 bedroom, and so there's this other incentive to making a larger unit.
Yeah, pretty complicated.
I think we have 2 more questions.
So the next one is or wait, I don't know if it's my turn or not. In NetZero RowHouse, did the ADU in the basement present any particular challenges as compared to a project without an ADU?
I would say not really in terms of the challenges. We were very often, it's very common in that neighborhood and elsewhere in DC to have basement apartments. Actually, both Charles and I have houses that have basement apartments, and so it's actually was it in some ways it's the only way that these projects make sense is to the rental income helps to offset the cost there.
Yeah.
So I think the challenge is if you've never done it before, it's quite a challenge because there's some really intense structural gymnastics that you have to undergo with regard to underpinning and so the technical fire separations and technical aspects of that. But it's pretty common and not even from a design perspective, but from a subcontractor labor perspective, there's a lot of folks that do it, and so it doesn't represent an insurmountable obstacle to the project.
I think we're down to the last question. Have you had conversations of providing the housing for multi-generational situations? Given the cost of housing, it seems like going to be a real consideration in the future. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
I agree.
we agree. I think all of these I think so much of these projects have the capacity to kind of help build multi-generational households, right? So whether it's the NetZero RowHouse, where you could have an in-law that needs to live there with you, maybe they live downstairs. You live in Cleveland Park and you've got someone who needs an elevator, and they downsize into the building because you live on the same street. And so I think it kind of goes back, like this is why the point access blocks are so important to talk about, because the idea is that you have a stair and an elevator. And so we spend a lot of time, and we do a lot of work in 4 and 5-story buildings that don't have an elevator because of the additional costs there. And so if you were to say, well, you don't have to build a stair, but you have to add an elevator, I think in almost any case, and that was a question we asked the developer in that panel, would you do that? And the answer is absolutely, right? And so by adding that elevator, it just makes the housing much more accessible, and it helps in those multi-generational situations. I mean, I feel like we had a project where we had like a family buy the front and the back, or the upstairs and the downstairs. So I think being able to kind of co-locate multiple generations of a family on a single site is one of the other benefits of both missing middle housing and also I think the future point access blocks. And that was something we really thought about in terms of laying out the units and what that interconnection would look like, so that if if the apartment next to you became available, that you could simply remove and knock out the panel and expand into that, or have somebody, an in-law or a parent live downstairs or upstairs.
Yeah, we didn't touch on this much in the talk, but one of the things that we do look at more now is these ADUs in the rear yards, where that's kind of the granny flat or the sort of multi-generational sites. We do those quite a bit as well.
are ADUs adopted throughout the state in all the townships or very
In
specific to certain?
DC, yeah, we can do DC and Arlington in Montgomery County, which are like the near and the close-in suburbs. So most of the close-in suburbs have adopted ADU language in their zoning regulations.
Well, I mean, this has been a fabulous discussion,
Awesome.
so we really appreciate it. And I think that I'll just do a little plug. I know Josh, you're going to give a closing, but I think I would love to see more of this interconnection amongst small firm exchanges throughout the country. I think that I would love to learn about what you all are doing in New Jersey or in Southern California or wherever folks are located, and having this is a great forum to understand more. So thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you both very much. And I have to say that since I was on the panel, I couldn't ask a question, so I'm just going to throw one in here at the end. The Parc project, the planning, I thought that was really brilliant. And I know that our office has tried to move structures in the past. Inevitably, it was just not in the client's budget, even if it was the right thing to do. And I'm curious how you overcame the financial difficulty to achieve that vision that you had on that project.
Yeah, we had looked at that site for a couple other developers and it just was not working. And we sort of kicked around this idea, kind of with there's a historic preservation officer in DC. This guy, Steve Calcott, is fantastic. I called him up and was just like, Steve, I'm looking at the site. Would you guys get on board if we like moved the house and relocated it? And he was like, I've been talking about that forever. And he was like, if we can get somebody to do it. And then we took the client like early on, and that particular client is he's just the kind of guy that gets shit done. He's the kind of guy that knows who to call, knows who to he got on it with expert house movers and was just like, hey, can you guys come take a look at this? And honestly, the pricing wasn't as bad. I mean, I think it was like 30 or 40K to move the house, which when you're talking about a site like that, it just was like, he's going to pay that in lawyers' fees to get it through. So and I think it was it just sort of happened to be, we just happened to have somebody that was on board with trying it, and we had somebody at the historic preservation office that was willing to advocate for it, and to bring those folks along with it, and we just kind of got lucky, I think, with we hit the perfect storm of people that were interested in doing it.
Well, I think the other thing, just to briefly add, is that it's been done in DC before. Like there's quite a few buildings in historic districts, and so the idea that it had been done before, I think, was a great.
That big church they moved.
Yeah, I mean, there's great comfort, I think, for people to say, "Oh, it's not that outrageous, right? We've done it before," and so having had that activity in the community really reduced the barrier or the obstacle to the planning move.
Yeah, wasn't easy though. It still wasn't easy.
Thank you both very much. We'd love to talk with your SFX certainly about how we can help each other. I can tell you that, through the small firm exchange and national discussions when I was state rep, we took I took ideas that you posted up there and brought them back to New Jersey. So I think that seeing what SFX National has been doing the last few years has really been transformative, and I think you guys do great work and really inspirational. Thank you both very much for this.
Anybody in DC, happy to have you.
Anyone who missed part of the presentation, I know there were some questions after Charles and Will have a chance to review this. This will go up on YouTube. So,
great.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.